Dennis, a lot happens over the course of a month. We always get to bring some of the key topics up here and get your take on them. And, one of the most interesting things that I think went around over the last month was really kind of this Detroit issue, because I don't even know that people understood a city could go bankrupt.
Yep.
And a city could actually fall. The fall of Detroit, which has been slowly falling for a while,
Exactly.
but, it kind of hit rock bottom here. Give us a little bit of your take. I mean, what does all this mean with the news about Detroit?
Well, bankruptcy of cities is fairly rare in our history. There are a number of cities in bankruptcy right now. Stockton, California, San Bernardino, city of Vallejo is in bankruptcy. Central Falls, Rhode Island, a few others. Detroit is the biggest.
Pretty small cities.
Yeah, pretty small. Detroit is the biggest municipal bankruptcy in history. And there's a lot of reasons, and typically in these situations, everybody's pointing fingers at one another saying, you caused this and you caused that. When everybody blames everybody else, it means everybody's at blame. It's a systemic problem. But if you think about the magnitude of what happened to Detroit, in 1900, Detroit had about 250,000 residents. In the next 50 years, it went from 200,000 to 1.9 million people. They had years in there where the population doubled every year. And what was happening was it was the age of the car, and people were moving in from the countryside to work in manufacturing jobs. But starting in the 1950s, the population has dropped every year since. This was a fabulous city at one time. At one time there were 14 different car companies in town, and all the attendant things, Fisher Body, all the rest of these people that built cars. During World War II, they built B-17s and B-24s in Detroit. It was called the Arsenal of Democracy. Trucks, Jeeps. People don't know that the Jeep you drive today was invented and built. The first one was built in Detroit, Michigan, by the Kaiser Nash Company, and it started going down. And
population started going down.
Population started dropping. So you wonder why. And basically, what happened was you had a city that got totally committed to one industry, and that was automobiles. When foreign competition started coming in and automation and that sort of thing started to come in, the auto industry started to become less profitable than it had been. And the auto companies seeking to continue their profits started moving plants, and they started doing various things, and it got worse and worse over time. So as jobs left, people moved to the new jobs. They worked for General Motors, and General Motors said, well, you're not working at our plant in Pontiac anymore. We're going to move you to Tennessee. So now you got all these good-paying jobs that have moved to Tennessee. So what happened first were the people, as the city began to decline, the people who could move, moved. They found a way to go to the suburbs or wherever to pay themselves. And, unfortunately, those tend to be the rich people. And
there are still some very nice areas outside of Detroit. I mean, Ann Arbor, there's some very nice areas.
Grosse Pointe Farms and Grosse Pointe, they're beautiful areas. And there are places amid the destruction that are still existing in Detroit. But Detroit also covers an enormous area. It covers 140 square miles, which is bigger than you could put all of Manhattan and Chicago inside the city limits of Detroit. That's how big it is. A third of it is now vacant, just absolutely nothing on it. So property taxes have fallen, income taxes have fallen. Detroit also has a kind of an interesting thing. They don't just tax you if you have a building for a business, they don't just tax you on the building. They tax you on the equipment in the building. So imagine having $1 billion auto plant, and you're being taxed on every machine you put in there. Well, it doesn't take a genius to figure out if I can avoid that, I'm going to. So all those jobs started to flow out. And eventually what you were left with were those people who couldn't leave. And those tended to be the people who economically were at the bottom of the rung. They had no choice. And so they're not going to pay taxes. They can't support taxes. Rich people pay more taxes than poor people because poor people can't pay taxes, and somebody's got to come out with an average. So you ended up destroying the tax base. And once you destroyed the tax base, then the city was on a decline, and nobody could do anything to decline. I mean, they have casinos in Detroit, and they still do badly.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's
lots
pretty amazing.
Of, what is it, Greektown?
Yeah, Greektown.
Huge amounts of enormous casinos.
Well, and the city takes 40% of their gross revenue, and it still does badly. So there's a couple of lessons you got to think about this. First of all, this is not going to get resolved quickly. This is going to end up in the federal court system because there's two big issues here that have to be dealt with. What is the status of a municipal pension? Is it a moral obligation of the city, or is it a hard and fast contractual legal obligation that has to be satisfied regardless? That's one thing. The other issue is, and I'll tell you why that's important in a minute, the other issue is the status of tax-exempt bonds that are issued by states and cities and states. Can they be modified by court order, or is the indenture of that bond inviolable once it's issued? The reason these are important is this. If pensions are ruled to be a moral commitment and not a hard and fast legal commitment, then other pensions can be defaulted upon, and it would imply that Social Security and things like that are an implicit or implicit guarantee of the government, not an explicit, which means it could be defaulted on. So that's a big issue. The second thing is tax-exempt bonds.
Essentially starting precedent in some ways. Well,
Yes,
this
yes.
happened here. And
Right. And this is the time when you get legal theories. And we have a lawyer here, but this is where you end up getting legal theories to get formed and end up driving things. The second thing is tax-exempt bonds have always been considered the second safest thing you could do after U.S. Treasuries. They may not be, because these bonds have been issued, and as they found out when they started doing this bankruptcy, they found out that there were derivative securities issued which encumbered certain assets which were producing taxes that were supposed to be paying certain bonds. And those as assets are off the books. So the question is whether or not these bonds are as safe as they used to be. But there's even some broader things here. I mean, first of all, economies are evolving things. You've got to feed them. You've got to take care of them. You've got to watch the change. You got to have functioning institutions. You got to have schools. You got to have tax collection. You got to have police, fire. You got to have rule of law. If you don't have those, you're not going to have order. It doesn't make any difference where it is. When institutions are strong, there's order. When trust is lost, you get chaos. The other thing is, when institutions start to fail, people leave. It'll always happen. And in a democracy, you must have a viable, loyal opposition to the ruling party to keep them on track. When there's one ruling party, there is no accountability. If there's no accountability, there will be failure. It's a lesson we learned in the financial crisis. When banks have no accountability, they'll do whatever they want to do, and they'll eventually fail.
and then they get bailed out. But that's a whole nother topic.
Yeah, bail out. The other thing is that uncontrolled pension costs will eat you alive. And it's like a cancer. It's very slow. You don't see it. You don't see it. Well, I'm gonna let the fireman retire at 50. You don't see the effect of that for years and years and years. It's easy to offer an increased pension benefit than it is to increase salary. But
because you're kicking the can down the road. I mean,
Right.
it's really all you're doing.
Exactly. And Detroit and other cities have made it worse because they went into the capital markets and they borrowed money to pay the pensions. So think about this. You've got the pension rising with inflation plus whatever negotiations you've got, and you're paying interest on these billions of dollars you're borrowing to fund the pension plan.
And people are living longer, so the pensions are lasting longer.
So, I mean, as you know, when you take a mortgage out and you pay an interest on a mortgage, you typically pay back 3 times as much money as you borrow. Well, think about the pension. Detroit went out and borrowed $10 billion to pay its pensions, and over time, they're going to end up paying $30 billion back. It's just, borrowing money to pay a pension is probably one of the stupidest things ever been done. Tax-exempt bonds, this is from an investment stand, tax-exempt bonds are no longer a one-decision object. You don't run to a tax-exempt bond and say, okay, it's a tax-exempt, it's going to be safe. You've got to make a credit decision of whether this bond is going to pay, which means you've got to spend some time looking at the credit quality of the issuer or whoever it is. Where is that revenue coming from? Is it secure? How corrupt is the city government? What's going on here? And so that's that. How
many bike lanes are they putting in?
Exactly right. And what are they using the money for? Look, sustainable stuff is wonderful. It doesn't produce a lot of revenue. So if they're going to do it for sustainable behavior, where are they getting the tax money to pay those bonds? And
they should start giving bikers tickets for running red lights when they think they're no longer a car.
Let's not get into that because I tell you what, you get into picking on bikers, you're going to have thousands of people circling this building.
They don't have radios on their bike. I'll be fine.
These guys are bad. No, they have radios. They can do iPods and stuff. So anyway, I think Detroit is going to have long-lasting effects on how we look at various things. And it's a shame that this great city, which was once a cultural icon, remember you had Motown music and all of this sort of stuff, is now, it's a dead, bloated rhino in the African sun, and there's a bunch of vultures called lawyers circling around who are going to make a lot of money on this thing, and a lot of other people are going to make money, and you're never going to get down. You're probably never going to get to the true cause of this thing. It's a shame, but it happened, and they really didn't have a choice.
So, Dennis, when you start looking at Detroit, and, we're obviously here in Seattle, the one thing that resonates with me is that Detroit really committed to one industry. Mm-hmm. Seattle is obviously much different.
Now.
But I mean, so, how would you reflect or compare Detroit with Seattle?
We have more trees.
We have more trees. That's true.
If some people listening to this may be old enough to remember, there was a sign on I-5 going out of Seattle at one time. It said, "Will the last person leaving Seattle turn out the lights?" And Seattle at that time was basically two industries. It was forestry and Boeing. Over time, the city, we have developed the Silicon Rainforest. And the reason we developed the Silicon Rainforest was it was cheaper to do that stuff here than it was in California. And we were lucky enough to have Bill Gates and Paul Allen and all the rest of these guys,
sure.
Jeff Bezos, these kind of people. So, but that's what I was talking about when cultures, societies, and economies have to be refreshed. Boeing has since come back, but it's now not as big a factor as it used to be. You now have much more diversity, and that's part of what goes on. I mean, I don't think Seattle has the problem that Detroit does, at least not now. But it does have pension issues. The state has a pension issue. You have an issue with taxing authority. I mean, we don't have an income tax, but we got a sales tax that would choke a horse. Mm-hmm. And how much more can you raise taxes before people start saying, "I'm going to go someplace else and work"? We're already seeing it to some extent. And the other thing is we're similar to Detroit in a lot of ways. We have all of our population centered right here in King, Pierce, and Snohomish counties. The rest of the state, I mean, there's nobody over there really. So this is the taxing place. If this area starts to have problems, the whole state has problems. The problem you do have, and I know I get a lot of calls on this. When was the last time we had a Republican anything elected in this state? Detroit never had a Republican mayor from 1961 on. There was no Republican elected to citywide office since the 60s. When you have every time in every place, when you have one political theory that runs everything, there is always a disaster. Always.
It's interesting. You look at the politics and the finances and whatnot, but there are so many. Like you said, we are very lucky to have the people who have been essentially born and raised here and then built incredible companies that are, I mean, you consider Amazon a tech company, but really it's retail.
Yeah, it is.
Microsoft is a software company.
Right.
You have planes, you have forestry, you have, there's a million different companies around here now. Real estate, yeah.
Now, look, we are very...
Number one financial planner in Redmond
exactly
lives
right.
here.
We are very blessed where we live. And every day we should be thankful that we live up here, not only because when we look outside in this kind of
easy to say in the middle of August when we're in this week of like 80 degrees, right?
As I told somebody this morning, remember this day in February. But we're very blessed to live here, and we live in a much more balanced economy. Is it perfect? No, no place is. But we are very blessed, and we've been very lucky with what's happened up here. We just need to realize that, and we need to make sure it doesn't die on us.